right, hello, and thanks for listening to our presentation today, Malthi and Media, Gaming the Bronze Age. Malthi itself is a fortified Middle to Late Bronze Age settlement located in southwestern Greece today, in the historical district of Messenia, right in the northeast corner of that. It dates from about 1800 to 1350 BCE. The settlement was excavated originally in the 1920s and 30s by a Swedish archaeologist, Nora Valmin, and more recently saw renewed work under the aegis of the Swedish Institute at Athens, co-directed by myself and Michael Lindblom of Uppsala University. The goals of the more recent work carried out between 2015 and 2017 included the correction of spatial data recorded by Valmin, as well as the digital preservation of a largely unconserved site. Toward this end, some of our first work at the settlement was to remap all the remaining exposed architecture using a differential GPS, and then subsequently to create 3D models of it using first a terrestrial laser scanner, which you can see there on the left, and then also digital, or rather aerial drone photography or photogrammetry, which you can see on the right. Because of the amount of digitized spatial data we ended up collecting, we began to think how the settlement could best be represented and reconstructed digitally. Our first efforts at this produced a veristic representation of Malthi as it may have looked during the early part of the Late Bronze Age, which is around 1600 BCE, and probably represents the height of the settlement. This model was created by Deezer Productions AB, which is a professional company specializing in archaeological visualization and augmented reality. This reconstruction was then uploaded to Sketchfab, which is a popular repository for 3D models, and it was intended to be publicly available. Problems arose, however, not least of which was shifting links, and then also the need to find a stable source of funding to continue allowing the model to be presented at the resolution we wanted it to be seen at. Essentially, these have made the model unavailable at this moment. Even aside from these logistical concerns, the recreation presents basically a static and unchanging perspective on what must have been a lively site, with houses used at different time periods alongside already abandoned spaces, livestock, gardens, and so forth. It's likewise completely unpopulated. What we're looking at now is a ghost town, which in turn creates additional challenges for non-professional viewers as far as envisioning Malthi as a living community. To begin to overcome this issue, the Malthi Media Project was born here at Smith College. The goal, in short, is to allow access to a complicated series of ruins and to bridge that gap between ruin and living community. Because no single model can claim to be authoritative, essentially an outcome of human diversity and the many variables of day-to-day life in the ancient world, we've instead chosen to embrace a variety of ways of recreating Malthi, ranging from traditional data-driven methods to platforms such as Minecraft, among the most popular games worldwide, as well as Twine, which is essentially an open access tool for creating choose your own adventure style narratives. Both tools are highly accessible and have been used in earlier archaeological work by Tara Copplestone, the Value Foundation, and many others. Though much of this work is creative, it's also based on an ongoing assessment of the living community at Malthi and the material remains that they've left behind in the archaeological record. And so at this point, I will turn it over to Annika.
The first most kind of conventional method of using this data was to try to bring Malthi to life in kind of the classical way by looking at Valmin's data from his excavation as well as the data from the more recent excavation. And this started by looking at house and grave information to figure out the size of the houses using Google Earth and the maps that have been created, as well as the measurements that were taken at the site to figure out where certain houses would be positioned, and also to use the grave information to figure out where graves could have been and what this might say about kind of the culture of burials and just the general amount of space in Malthi. And also we have used some of the information about what is located, what objects are found in certain houses to figure out whether they were residential or potentially more communal areas. And also using the stone piles that were in Malthi and being able to just use that information in order to find a more accurate assessment of what the settlement may have looked like. And one of the important things that we use to determine space is one of the important parts that we used was pithoi to kind of determine how much storage space certain houses had and potentially to determine how wealthy people would have been living there, or how many people would have been able to live in an area based on how much storage they had. And we can use this information to fuel the more creative approaches and see what Malthi might have looked like through technology, especially Minecraft and Twine. And then this data is also able to be used to predict certain information about Malthi, such as the population size, potentially the wealth of certain households, the median age based on the grave data, which is important to kind of figuring out how the settlement may have changed over time and how it's a dynamic living community. And resurrecting old media is a large part of this. We went through Valmeen's old journals, which had information about his original excavation and provided more information about where certain things were located and what certain stone piles may have actually been. And it helped with the understanding of the site and with helping map out the site and figure out what may have been houses, what may have been more communal areas, and just what different settlements were. And now turning it over to Sarah.
Hello, I'm Sarah. I've been working on the Malthi project for about 1.5 years, although the Minecraft section has been somewhat less than that. And my current project is working on rebuilding Malthi the settlements in Minecraft, which you can see a work in progress shot of here. And so the first step of that is really to build the flat map of Malthi in Minecraft. This I did using Minecraft Art's Minecraft image converter, which allows you to put in basically an image with a certain certain dimensions and turn the pixels of that image into blocks that you could place in Minecraft, since Minecraft is based off of basically a block system. It's like Legos. And so from there, I took the image that I put through the converter and basically copy pasted, built it in Minecraft. The tricky thing here is to maintain all of the diagonals and the curves of the original building, since again, Minecraft's base block is blocks. And so to that end, we decided on a scale of 2 blocks to 1 meter in real life, which would allow us to basically achieve a greater level of detail and curvature in Minecraft that we otherwise would not have been able to do. The next step was to turn the flat map of Malthi into an actual hill, since Malthi, the settlement, sits at the top of a hill. For this, I took the topography map that you see on the right here, and I put it through the Minecraft image converter again. And then I took all of the lines that it generated, like the concentric, not quite circles that you see here, and traced them out in temporary blocks over the top of the hill. And then I used a Minecraft mod called World Edit, which allows you to move multiple mass amounts of blocks at a time. And so I manually moved each layer up by, however many blocks it needed to be moved up. And so here on the left, you can see 2 progress shots. The one on top is sort of from like the upper middle-ish part of Malthi, which you can see in the topography map has less lines and is less hilly, I suppose. And on the bottom, you see what Malthi looks like when built in Minecraft from the bottom left of the topography map, which has a much steeper drop off. This is what Malthi looks like from the top of the hill. As you can see, it drops away in the distance, as you would hope a hill does. And yeah, this is using something in Minecraft called shaders, which basically changes the way Minecraft will render light and shadow and make it look really pretty. The next step was to take the entire hill that I had just built and copy paste it over to the right, which I also did using World Edit. And this is because we plan to build two versions of Malthi. The one on the left here, which you can see is not really built up or anything, that is going to be a more faithful recreation of what Malthi looks like today. And the intent is to basically put together a tour through that version of Malthi, which will discuss what modern archaeological efforts are, and what current archaeological findings have been. And the one on the right, which you can see is partially built up, is going to be a more, not fanciful, but imaginative recreation of what ancient Malthi might have looked like. And so that's intended for more of, an exploration of what a typical old Greek town might have looked like. Here you can see another image of the two hills. This is from the one on the right looking over the one on the left. And you see there are huts here, right? That takes me to my next topic, hut building. So the next step in recreating Malthi is to build up the huts so that it actually has buildings that people could have lived in. To this end, as Annika mentioned, I've been working on figuring out which rooms are housed based on what she's been translating from Valmeen's work. And basically, we determine whether a room should be roofed based on the distance between the walls and whether it could support a roof, whether there are any towers or things in the middle of the room that could have helped support a roof, and so on. And determining how many buildings are actually roofed versus which are courtyards, which are open spaces, can also give clues towards what the population of Malthi looked like. Along the top here, you see a row of huts, and in the middle, you see another cluster of huts. This is a close-up of the top row. They're all single story. They're fairly small. You can see the doors are short. And then here is one of the ones in the middle. These were more important buildings that the community sort of was gathered around. And some of them had 2 stories, which you can see in the break in the wall here in the middle. Annika also mentioned pithoi, which were, if you remember, pots, basically, that we can use to sort of guess at what the population of Malthi was like. And so my next bit of working on recreating Malthi in Minecraft was to create a texture pack. So what a texture pack does is it, instead of rendering the block as it looks like in quote unquote vanilla Minecraft, you can make it your own 3D model and replace one of the original blocks in Minecraft with your new 3D model. So that's what I've done here. On the left, you see a shorter jar, which could have been used for general purpose storage. And on the right here, the tall one, is a pithos. In our scale, this is 1 meter tall. It has around 300 liters of storage space. And using the number of pithoi in Malthi, we can use that to estimate the storage capacity and population of Malthi. I make the texture pack blocks through a program called Blockbench, which allows you to take a series of rectangular prisms, scale them, move them wherever you need them to be, and then add your own textures. As you can see on the right here, this is the reference image I was working off of with what a pithos might have looked like. Yeah. And as for next steps, I plan to build up both the current version of Malthi and the past version of Malthi, so it feels more lived in. You can see in the background of this image, there's a lot of interior decoration. It feels alive. This is an example from a past personal project of mine, and I hope to make, the ancient Greek town version of Malthi look something like this, so that it actually feels like there were people there. And eventually, we're going to open the world for interaction and exploring the history of Malthi via non-player characters or NPCs, which I've included an example of a villager who could act as an NPC in the foreground here. And the NPCs would basically give a tour around both the modern day archaeological findings version of Malthi and around the past, like actual Malthi like settlement. That's all I've got. I'm handing it off to Nora now.
Yes, I have been working on Twine, which is an open access tool for designing nonlinear narratives and games. I've been using everyone else's research to create a kind of choose your own adventure style interactive game through which the player can choose to explore Malthi from a variety of perspectives throughout time, including a Homeric hero, a contemporary farmer, and the original excavator of the settlement, Nathan Valmeen. Pictured here is part of the story web, which makes up the game. It's still in progress, and if there is a finished product, if we ever decide that it has reached a stopping point, it will be much more complex. There will be, this is just a fragment of the work in progress picture. The viewer sees this homepage when they begin the game. From here, they can role play within any of these stories, which have been created based on mythology and archaeological evidence from Valmeen and from the 2015 through 17 excavations. The game is designed for accessibility, to be easily navigable and understood by people with any level of background knowledge. Valmeen's book about his excavation, the Swedish Messenia excavation, and Annika's translation of his field journals enhance the stories with details and anecdotes that make the experience more vivid. Here is a map of with images from the 2015 through 17 excavations. It's embedded within one of the stories, which follows the 21st century archaeologists. And the map includes photos of the site where they were taken and relevant archaeological findings throughout. The game blends story and history, facts and anecdotes, proof and conjecture. One of the storylines is entirely based on a myth mentioned briefly in the Iliad. Here, you can play a Homeric hero, you can choose to challenge the muses to a singing contest. If you win, you're blinded, your gift for song is taken, and you forget how to play the harp, as happened to Thamyris briefly in the Catalogue of Ships in Homer's Iliad. Or you can change that myth. These aspects make experiencing Malthi more dynamic than reading a page of facts. And they emphasize the depth of alternative narratives and avoid the tendency to canonize a single interpretation as the exclusive authoritative story. And back to Rebecca.
So this project is intended to be expandable in a number of different ways, from additional creative narrative making like fan fiction to more robust game engines like Unity. Some of this has already been started in a separate project run by Megan Caston of Spark and the University of Glasgow. She's using the terrestrial laser scanner data that we collected to invite students to create their own reconstructions of Malthi in a sort of tutorial. But such resources, and that's, I should say, visible on the top there, but such resources, as well as our own work in Minecraft and Twine, also present opportunities for engagement and creation by non-specialist audiences outside of the academy. And their ready accessibility, digital creations can forge new paths towards multivocality in archaeology and embrace the production of archaeological knowledge by audiences who have traditionally been excluded from this work. Multivocality and non-authoritative, non-linear presentation of archaeological data has long been a goal of digital work, as seen, for instance, here in Ruth Tringham's Dead Women Do Tell Tales, which is sort of one of the models for this project. But as we saw with our earlier model on Sketchfab, efforts to produce larger scale digital narrative projects are limited by the inherent transience of the web. And that is also demonstrated by similar projects like Rosemary Joyce's Sister Stories, which was also a branching nonlinear project, which is no longer, as far as I can tell, available. But perhaps permanence is not something to be desired with the ever-changing possibilities presented by digital archaeological work. With this project, it's our hope to continue this exploration of these new methodologies in presenting archaeological material as a body of evidence with abundant and shifting interpretive possibilities. We don't wish to suggest that archaeological data doesn't offer facts about the ancient world, but rather that these facts can embrace a range of possible alternative narratives. Digital media offers a unique opportunity to allow this range of interpretations to be presented together, almost side by side, as we saw with our two models of Malthi and Minecraft. It embraces the ambivalences presented by archaeological material, not as a weakness, but as an invitation to consider the multiplicity of the lived experiences of the ancient world. So many thanks for listening to the presentation, for your attention, and also to our colleagues and our sponsors. Thank you very much.